Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a bit about the Phoenix Suns. It's been a weird period, to say the least, for the Suns over the past few years. Probably the most active franchise in terms of star player trades, acquisitions, out of anybody in the association over these last 3 or so seasons. They added Chris Paul back in the 2020 offseason, made the finals with him, would end up losing in the second round after setting a franchise record number of wins in the following season, losing to the Dallas Mavericks in a blowout Game 7. They added Kevin Durant at the trade deadline last year before losing to the Nuggets in the second round. They would add Bradley Beal in exchange for Chris Paul this offseason. Basically, all the role players from last year's roster are now different. They've got a new head coach in Frank Vogel rather than Monty Williams. They've got a new owner, which is a big change. They've only got 2 guys left from that finals team now on this roster at the moment, between Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, and I don't know how Ayton is the other guy on that list. It feels like he's consistently in trade rumors. Maybe he's the new John Collins, Miles Turner, where he's consistently in rumors but never gets dealt. I don't know. Regardless, it's been super weird for the Suns. There's been so much going on, so many really high highs and really low lows. And going into this season, they're more all in than ever. They've given up like all their assets to put this team together, adding Kevin Durant, adding Bradley Beal. This is it. They've got to make this team work, this group work, whether it's this season, maybe next season. They've got to go out there and try and compete for championship. And if they don't get one, it's going to be disastrous over there in Phoenix. Now, I do like a lot of what they've done, and I think they've built a team that on paper projects as one of the best in the Western Conference, but I have some real concerns about the personnel, about some outside factors that could end up impacting this team and leading to them being a big disappointment. The more that I think about the Suns, the more confused that I get, because again, theoretically, they probably should be one of the top seeds in the Western Conference and a championship contender, but because of some of those issues, I think there's also a chance that they're a play-in team by the time the regular season wraps up. So in this video, I'm going to go over what I really like about the Suns, my concerns, and overall, just try to portray to you how confused I am about them and why I'm so conflicted about where they're going to end up in this year's standings, especially in a really tough Western Conference. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Of course, when we talk about Phoenix, we've got to start with the star trades. I'll begin with Kevin Durant and then we'll get into Bradley Beal. I really like the KD trade when it happened. I still really like it now. It sucks that you had to give up some of your core pieces like Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, who absolutely went off in the second half of the season for Brooklyn. He's been fantastic over there, but I don't think Suns fans should lose too much sleep. I don't think Mikal Bridges was ever going to turn into that player in Phoenix. I think he really needed that change of scenery, needed the room to spread his wings over there in Brooklyn that he now has to become this type of player. So while it does hurt that you had to give up those 2 guys and a billion first-round picks, you've got to do so if Kevin Durant is on the market. Their championship window felt like it was kind of teetering on being closed. It felt like it was still open if they made the right moves, but that it was nowhere near as open as it was a couple of seasons ago. So they add Kevin Durant, who is still one of the best players in the world, even if he is getting up there in age. He has a game that's just going to continue to age well, in my opinion, as long as he can stay healthy, which has become somewhat of a concern for Kevin Durant over these past 2 years. But if he can stay healthy, I think him and Devin Booker is a great duo to have. I really like that trade when it happened, and again, I still really like it now. But the Beal trade is one I don't like nearly as much. I do think Beal is still really good. I think a lot of people honestly have underrated him because of the season he just had over there in Washington, where his numbers were down a bit and the Wizards just weren't a great team. Sure, he's not the player that he was a few years ago where he was averaging 30, but this year is kind of a conscious effort by him and the coaching staff to have him take a bit more of a backseat, be more of a facilitator, a connecting piece, rather than this shoot the ball every time down the court, 30-point per game scorer that he was a few seasons ago. I still think Beal is a really good player. He's an all-star caliber guy, and I think the role that he played over there in Washington this past year will honestly help him, because I think he's going to play a similar one over in Phoenix for this upcoming season, especially alongside talent like Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. You don't want Beal out there trying to score 25, 30 points a night. You just need him to kind of take a bit of a backseat, take some of the offensive pressure off of them, make plays when they need him to, play make a little bit. I think Beal can fit that role fine. Now, do I think he's a great facilitating number 1 point guard on your roster? No, and that's the role they're going to apparently have him in for this upcoming season. He's going to play the PG. I don't think that means he's going to be doing all the ball handling duties, but I don't really love him in that role, and to me, it feels like adding Beal is just upping your strengths rather than addressing your weaknesses, which were overall depth, The defense, both things we're going to talk about a little bit later. Beal really doesn't fix either of those issues, even if he makes your offense absolutely lethal, which I do think is going to be fun. I mean, this Suns team is probably going to be capable of putting up 130, 150 points on any given night, but it's a matter of can they stop the opponent from doing the same. I will say, just from the perspective of swapping players, it makes sense to trade Chris Paul for Bradley Beal. That's the only player asset you had to give up. Chris Paul has been great for them the past few seasons, but again, he was visibly declining. The injuries are always a concern with his. He's making a lot of money. It makes sense to upgrade to Beal if you can, although giving up the rest of their draft capital in terms of pick swaps is a bit concerning. They now don't have control of their own first-round pick until, I believe, 2030, so if this thing doesn't work, it's kind of a disaster. Like I said earlier, they went from all-in with the Kevin Durant trade to now all-in in all capital letters, because if this thing doesn't work, I don't know how you recover in the next decade. But despite my hesitancy, I will say that a big four on paper of Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Ayton sounds pretty good. Like, that's one of the most talented core four of guys across the entire association, but it means nothing if the supporting cast isn't great. And they had very limited cap space. In fact, they had literally none to try and bring in some solid players this offseason. But I will say, I like what they did in terms of bringing in role players to fit this team. I think they filled out the bench pretty nicely. It's not perfect by any means, but considering what they had to use, I think they did a phenomenal job. In the Beal trade, they managed to get Jordan Goodwin from the Wizards, who's a really feisty point of attack defender at the point guard spot. He can facilitate a little bit. The shooting is kind of rough, but he'll get a lot of wide open looks from Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, those guys taking some pressure off of him, so maybe that percentage can still jump, and he's still relatively young, so there's always room for him to grow. I like that acquisition as their new backup PG, especially after they traded Cameron Payne away. They're going to rely a lot on his play this upcoming season. Yuta Watanabe comes in as one of the best 3/4 position shooters in the entire league. He shot like 50% from the corner this past season. He shot around 44% from deep on the entire year. He played alongside Kevin Durant in Brooklyn, so the two of them are familiar with each other's game as well. I think he's a good fit for this roster. They had basically nobody who could consistently knock down those corner looks against the Nuggets in that series. Now they bring in Yuta, who is one of the best shooters in that area across the entire association. I think Drew Eubanks is a fine backup big. He's not phenomenal, but I think he's going to get the job done. He can also stretch the floor, which is nice for a big man on this type of team. Keita Bates-Diop, I think, is maybe their most under the radar signing of this entire free agency. He is really, really solid, and he projects as a perfect role player for this type of team. All you need him to do is knock down some outside shots, which he can do, and defend, which he's also pretty good at. I wouldn't be surprised if Keita Bates-Diop is the starting three for a majority of the season for the Suns. I think he fits that role really well, and I wouldn't be surprised if he is one of their best players, period, over this entire season outside of that core four group of guys. I like Eric Gordon as an acquisition, another offensive piece. The defense is rough, but you might as well bring in some more firepower if you can. Chimezie Metu, I think, is a fun option at the 4/5. They retain Josh Okogie, who is solid for them this past season, as well as Damian Lee, Ish Wainwright. Phoenix also brought in Bol Bol, who is interesting. I think people are getting a little bit too hype on him and kind of setting him up for failure. He had a good start to the season for the Magic last year, which was really encouraging, but eventually his consistency really dropped off. The defense is really rough at times. Eventually he was completely out of the rotation for the Magic, who didn't even make the playoffs. Maybe the Suns are finally able to unlock his potential, but I'm not putting too many expectations on Bol Bol for the Suns this season. Overall, with all these signings, which again, the bench isn't perfect by any means, but I think it's at least fine. It's a lot better than what I thought it was going to be going into the season. They found some solid role players, some guys that I think they could find some real value with, players that fit certain archetypes that they needed on this roster. The front office did a pretty good job with this free agency, and so I think on paper, when I take a look at it, even though I do have some reservations about the Beal trade, I think the Suns are going to be really good. They feel like one of the best teams in the Western Conference. I think if they gel, they can be a championship contender, and they're probably going to be really scary to face on any given night. However, there are still some definite concerns with this team when I take a look at the roster, the personnel that they've brought in, that ultimately may end up taking them down quite a few notches. The big one is the defense. They really don't have a lot of elite defenders. In fact, I wouldn't say they have any elite defenders on this entire roster. Book is shown to be a pretty solid defender. Kevin Durant has some moments, although he was pretty rough this past season, and really hasn't been the same defensively since he ended up tearing his Achilles a few years ago. Jordan Goodwin, like I mentioned, is good at the point of attack. Keita Bates-Diop is a solid defender. Ayton has shown to be a solid anchor of a defense. Like, they've got some good to solid guys, But they also have some players that I'm pretty worried about. Bradley Beal has never been a good defender. Eric Gordon isn't one. Damian Lee isn't one. Yuta Watanabe is not a great defender, even though he has some moments. Like, it's hit or miss between the guys defensively on this roster. It feels like most of these contending teams have at least one elite to really, really good defender. The Suns really don't have that. And I think there are more holes on this roster defensively than a number of other ones that are of championship caliber across the league. They're going to rely a lot on DeAndre Ayton to be that anchor down low, and he's anchored 3 top 7 defenses over the past few years, so he's shown that he can do that. But those teams also had like Mikal Bridges, who was a defensive player of the year level guy for a season and has always been one of the better wing defenders over the past few years. They had some other good personnel too, like Ayton was definitely a force in that, but it wasn't him solely. They're going to need their stars, KD, Beal, Booker, to really buy in and defend at a high level. Same with those role players. I do think Frank Vogel, as a defensive-minded coach, is going to help this team, and his schemes will certainly help mask some of those issues. But I worry when they get to the playoffs and face some of the best offenses in the league, are they going to be able to keep up on the defensive end? There's also the issue of them not really having a real point guard on the roster anywhere. They've got some good playmakers. Beal, who's supposed to play the PG position, showed that he can playmake pretty well in Washington. Booker has had some great playmaking seasons and is a very capable ball handler. I'm not questioning that at all. Kevin Durant has even averaged around 5 assists per game, even a bit more over the last few seasons of his career. So guys can playmake for each other, but there's not that one real guy to kind of orchestrate everything, set up the offense. I think that could be something that they miss going into the season. Maybe that's a type of player they tried to trade for at some point, although without any first-round picks, I don't know how they make that acquisition. So it's just something that I think might be interesting to watch without having that like true number one playmaking point guard that a lot of championship caliber teams have, or at least even if it's not a point guard, it's like an elite playmaker somewhere on the roster. The Suns really don't have that anywhere, and maybe that ends up being an issue. Maybe it really isn't that much of a problem, and this like playmaking by committee type of thing that they're going for, it seems, ends up working. But I don't know. I just think it's interesting. I also think it could end up affecting DeAndre Ayton, who isn't the biggest self-creator. Like, he's able to self-create some buckets, but typically he gets mostly set up, or he spots up in some locations around the mid-range area, or finishes plays at the rim. So there could be a chance that that could hurt him a little bit this season. It might just take some time to gel, and about halfway through the season, they each figure out their roles, and it ends up working. But it is kind of weird. However, my biggest concern really isn't even basketball related for this team. It's the injuries. Devin Booker missed 30-ish games last season, and he was hurt as well in the 2022 playoff run. He's been hurt here and there the past few years. Kevin Durant hasn't played more than 55 games since his Achilles injury in 2020. He played just over half the season this past year, and the reason why he's missed time over the last couple seasons has been for a variety of reasons. I'm starting to think that as he's getting older, the injuries are just going to keep piling up. Bradley Beal hasn't played more than 60 games since 2019. That was 4 years ago at this point. He played just 90 games combined over the past 2 seasons. Like, the Suns are really relying on these 3 guys to carry them and be their best players every single night. They're going to rely on them probably to play heavy minutes by the time they get to the playoffs, and they're all somewhat injury prone. If they all stay healthy, I think they could probably overcome some of the other concerns like the defense, the lack of a point guard, the likely gelling period that they're going to face at the beginning of the season, which might result in them losing more games than they will later on. These are all things that I think they could eventually overcome if they can stay healthy. But are they going to? Again, these 3 guys have shown that they're probably going to get hurt at one point or another throughout this season. If they each miss a little bit of time, it's not that big of a deal, but if like Kevin Durant misses 30 to 40 games, Devin Booker misses a significant period, if Beal misses 30 games, if any of those absences happen, or if a couple of them overlap and they're missing 2 of their stars at once, I don't know how they're going to survive. They're going to lose a lot of games. The depth is okay, but it's not fantastic. They really need their stars to stay healthy. Now, of course, for basically any team, you can say, oh, if their stars get hurt, they're not going to be as good. Like, that's a given. But for the Suns, with their stars' track record of injuries, it seems a lot more likely that they're going to have to battle through these guys missing time at one point or another throughout this season. And with such a big overhaul in the roster, they need all the time they can to gel, to build that defense together, to figure out how the playmaking is going to work, to establish their roles in this offense before they get to the playoffs, where even if they're like a play-in team, which is possible if they deal with some injuries, they could theoretically, if they're healthy, still come out of the Western Conference. We saw it happen with the Miami Heat making it out of the Eastern Conference through the play-in. The Lakers went to the Western Conference Finals out of the play-in. Like, it's definitely not unprecedented. but they need that time to gel to grow and learn together and establish their identity as a team. It could maybe be somewhat similar to what the Clippers went through this past season, where heading into the year, it felt like they were probably championship contenders. I picked them to win the whole thing before the season, but they had some injuries, which of course brought them down the standings when Kawhi Leonard and Paul George weren't always playing. That also led to them not really being able to gel as much, which led to an inconsistent offense as well as defense. When they made it to the playoffs, it felt like things were clicking, but injury struck again, and they lost to the Suns, weirdly enough, in the first round. I could see another situation where we see this Suns team face similar obstacles. They're dealing with injuries, inconsistent play from their stars, so they're not really figuring out how things should be played. And like the Clippers ended the season last year, I think they could be right there teetering on the edge of maybe ending up in the play-in. I'm really hoping that this isn't the case and somehow all three of the guys are able to stay healthy, but I think that's somewhat unlikely. This is why it's so tough for me to pick where the Suns are going to land. I typically do predictions based on every team just being fully healthy, but with this and with those other concerns with the defense and the point guard stuff, which I think is legitimate, I really don't know where they're going to end up in the Western Conference. If they're fully healthy, I think they're going to be championship contenders. I also wouldn't be surprised if you told me that by the end of the year, they're like a 7 or an 8 seed battling in the play-in tournament. With all that being said, I appreciate y'all watching. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think about the Suns. Do you think they're championship contenders or not? Do you think that my concerns for them are valid, or am I overblowing them a little bit? What do you think of the Bradley Beal trade? Or do you have them finishing in the Western Conference standings at the end of the regular season? Also, let me know any other teams you want to see me break down this offseason. We've got a lot of time ahead of us until basketball comes back, so I'd love to talk about some of your favorite teams. Just let me know down below which ones you want to see. And yeah, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss on any of these videos. I will see y'all later. Ray1, stay back.